Live.
Okay, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the October 3rd, 2019 Nashua City Planning Board. Mr. Secretary, can you go ahead and take the roll?
Yes. Mayor Donches. Mike Peterson.
Present.
Scott Leclerc.
Here.
Adam Varley.
Here.
Edward Weber. Here. Alderman David Tenza.
Present.
Alderman Marianne Mazzilli-Goya. Jerry Ripucci. Maggie Harper. Bob Bollinger.
Here.
Thank you. Yeah, right, yeah.
You good?
Good.
Okay, so we have a quorum, and everybody here will be participating in voting. So we have in front of us the minutes from the September 12th, 2019 Planning Board meeting. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at those and want to make a motion either way as to whether they're ready for us to approve or have any amendments?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the September 12th, 2019 Planning Board minutes, unamended.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Bollinger to approve the September 12th minutes with no changes to them. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions?
Abstention.
So we got two, Ed, Alderman Tenza and Mr. Riley.
Okay.
Okay, so that motion passes. Okay, so communications, Roger.
I'll defer to Linda tonight.
All right, Linda.
Good evening. I'll go through the items quickly that are in your folder this evening. The first up, you have a flyer regarding the Heritage Rail Trail East. Next Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we're going to have an informational meeting here in the auditorium about the future rail trail. I think we talked about it when we were seeing the Henry Hangar project and the project on Temple Street and how it will impact that. So you're all welcome to come and attend the meeting and give your input. Next up, we have an email from Corporation Counsel requesting that case number 1, 7 Gaffney Street, be tabled to the next meeting so legal has time to get an opinion to the board.
Okay.
Then we have case number 3, 301 Pine Street. We got updated comments from engineering, as well as a updated waiver, sidewalk waiver request letter. And finally, a letter from an abutter regarding that project. Case number 4, 21.5 Fairmont Street, we got updated comments from engineering, as well as responses from Hayner Swanson regarding that.
Yep.
Case number 5, 1086 West Hollis Street, we got quite a few communications, and I know Attorney Brad Westgate will speak to that.
Okay.
We got an updated technical review meeting sheet to determine items of regional impact. And finally, under other business, we have an update on capital improvements. We had a special meeting just recently to rate 4 projects, and Roger can speak to that at the time. And that is it.
Okay, thanks. Report of Chairman, Committee, and Liaison. Ed, do you have anything from that?
Yes. We had 3 things on the September meeting. One was 5-9, the Collins Flower Shop. They wanted to put in new signs, and that was approved. And then there's a case for 28 Concord Street that was doing the, is for bridges. It's not really a bridge, it's to help people in there, and they're gonna really update and make it really look very nice building. It is a nice building, they're just gonna update it and make it really gonna help the city out a lot when they're doing that. And it's really a great cause for that. And then we had the Country Tavern Restaurant, 452 Amherst Street, and we gave a favorable recommendation.
Okay, and specifically that subcommittee was, which committee was that?
That's with the HDC. All of this is with the
Okay.
HDC.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and read the procedure of the meetings and hearings now. So after each legal notice of conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision is read by myself, the board will first determine if the application is complete and ready for us to take jurisdiction. The public hearing will begin, at which time the applicant or representative will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. They shall speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations, and the board will have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or staff. I'll then ask for testimony from the audience. First, I'll ask for anybody wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan to speak. If they so choose, they can come forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. This is the time for you to express any concerns or ask any questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, I'll ask for testimony from anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan. The board will then ask any relevant follow-up questions of the applicant. The applicant will then be given a rebuttal period, at which time they'll respond to any concerns raised by the public testimony. One public member will then be allowed to respond to only those items brought forth during the rebuttal period, if that's necessary. And after that time, the public hearing will end and the board will resume a public meeting, at which time we'll deliberate and vote on the application before us. I'd ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject in hand and not repeat what has already been said. We want to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and considering all applicable approval criteria established in our national revised ordinances for conditional special use permits, site plans, and subdivision plans. This time, I'd ask for your interest and your courteous attention, and also that if you do have a cell phone, that you go ahead and put it on vibrate or silence. Okay. So old business conditional special use permits, there are none. Old business subdivision plans, case number 1, Gerald Rapucci, owner, and application and acceptance of proposed 2-lot subdivision. This property is located at 7 Gaffney Street. So this case has been tabled from our September, our earlier meeting in September. There is obviously a communication in our packet from the Corporation Council asking for this to move forward to our October 17th meeting to give them time to respond to our previous request. Does anybody want to make a motion? Mr. Varley?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to further table this case until our October 17th meeting.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Varley to continue to table this into the October 17th meeting. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Ballinger. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes. Okay, so that will be tabled to October 17th. Next, old business site plans, case number 0. There are none. New business conditional special use permits. Case number 2, 16 Commercial Street, Realty LLC, Eric L. Parent applicant. Application and acceptance of proposed conditional use permit to allow a vehicle repair shop. This property is located at 16 Commercial Street. Can I have a motion as to whether or not this application is ready for us to, is complete and ready for us to take jurisdiction?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion to take jurisdiction by Mr. Varley. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Ballinger. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion passes. Okay, we have someone from the applicant?
Yeah, I'm
Sure.
American, yeah.
Yeah, just go ahead and state your name and address, and then go ahead and give us a description of what you're
All right.
Looking for.
My name is Eric Parent, and I reside at 120 Ridge Road, Nashua.
Yep.
Do you want me to go through the whole conditional use thing?
Yeah, give us an overview of
Okay.
sort of what you're trying to do.
All
We
right,
have
the idea
packets
is
of,
right now I'm running a landscape supply center out of there.
Yep.
We opened up 2 years ago. I hired a full-time mechanic to work on my equipment.
Yep.
Since I have 20 pieces of trucks and equipment that are registered to the road, I need to have an inspection station.
Okay.
To get an inspection station there, I have to be approved for an auto repair shop through the state of New Hampshire.
Okay.
So that's why I'm going for this conditional use permit to get the inspection station. And it also allows me to work on other trucks, not necessarily cars, but more heavy equipment and trucks.
Okay. Great.
It's not, I mean, the use of the property was the old ready-mix plant in Nashua
Yeah.
years ago. They used to repair trucks there for years. So I'm not doing anything different that hasn't been done there yet.
Okay.
There's no impact into the driving, pedestrians or anywhere like that. You still get the same amount of traffic going in and out. We're not talking 10, 15 trucks going in to get repaired every day. It's maybe 1, 2 a week. So it's not a major thing.
Okay. All right.
We're not adding any buildings. You see the plans, they show that they're all existing. The main building, or say the biggest building on the property is the one that's gonna be the repair shop, but only one side of the bay will be a repair shop, not the whole bay. Most of the stuff in there, I got my office building is to the left of the property. The rear building is more storage. It's just dry storage in there. There's no heat, no electricity or nothing in there, so it's just a big garage. So that's about it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks. And I just direct the planning board members, there is a memo in the packet for the conditional use approval criteria that, you can take a look at. It kind of goes through each of them. And that the engineering department has reviewed and don't have any comments, so. Any questions for the applicant? Ed?
Previous, has there been any major spills from working on the vehicles? Because it doesn't have any, does it currently have a,
Well, we're going through, when Ready Mix closed up, they had a diesel tank in the ground. They removed the diesel tank, found something in the ground. I don't know what they found, but they found something. It took 2 years from them to figure out what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah.
Concord came down, they cleaned it all out, backfilled everything. Right now, we have clean ground right now. They're still testing the well. We have 2 wells in a property that they're still testing to this day.
Right.
I think we have another test coming in November. If this test comes out clear, then they're closing the book on it, and we'll be all set.
great, great.
So otherwise than that, it's clean site.
Well, what I'm talking about is you're gonna be using it for repairing trucks.
Correct.
And if there was a oil spill, do you have a way to make sure that it doesn't get into your soil?
Yeah, I mean, all the work's done on concrete, so it has to penetrate concrete first. Anyways, we pick up it right away. Got the speedy dry goes down right away. We have the 2x2 oil cloths.
Yep.
That pick up the oil real quick also. But we're very diligent about not having spills,
Okay, great,
so, I mean.
thank you.
Mr. Ballinger?
Yes, Mr. Parent, if you're granted the authority to do inspections, is there any possibility this could turn into a commercial endeavor where, as a side business, you're doing inspections, or is it strictly?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the idea is to get the inspection station, I can do my own inspections instead of paying, because I have a full-time mechanic who's certified to do everything. So the idea is to do the inspections on my own vehicles also to save me money, but it's also a way to pay for some of the up costs, the mortgage, the insurance, the taxes and all that. It's just another way of revenue.
Okay, no, thank you. I wasn't clear on that. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, hearing none, I think we're all set at the moment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan, please come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
Peter Schaefer, 15 East Street. I just wanted to ask a question, for the record, so it's on the record. I just want to know, sort of, does this, because we're getting the bike path that's going right on that property that they're building next year. So I just want to know whether there was any noise impact from this or any pollution, but more like air pollution or things like you were talking about, whether there's any kind of pollution that there's a potential. I just wanted to put that on the record and have them respond to that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or have a concern with the plan? Anybody wishing to speak in favor? Hearing none, I guess I give the applicant a chance to come forward. There was the one question from the audience. Maybe if you could talk about any different levels of noise, or I think we kind of did talk about the pollution a little bit with Ed's question, but.
Right, I mean, the Heritage Trail is going on the back side where you see on the plans, it says Boston, Maine Corp. That's the
Yep.
the railroad bed.
Okay.
That's gotta be 100, 200 feet away from the garage.
Okay.
So there would be not any noticeable noise to them, I mean, besides an impact gun that you might hear, but it can't be any worse than hearing a Harley Davidson going down West Hollow Street. Pollution, there's no pollution besides the cars that drive in and out. I mean, there's no, we talked about the oil spills.
Yeah.
I don't foresee any problems.
Okay.
So,
right.
I don't know how to answer that question, so.
Mr. Weber?
Hours of operation.
We operate from 8 to 5. Except, I'd say, winter time, we do snow emergency, snow removal. So that's,
Been doing it, right? You've been doing it.
I've been doing snow removal for 20 years, but I've been doing it 2 years out of there,
Yeah.
and, but, also Newport's right next to me, they do snow removal. They're right next door, so,
That's been going on already.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
thanks. At this point, I'd ask, is there any further questions from or concerns from the audience? Hearing none. Any further questions from the board while we're in the hearing for staff or the applicant? Mr. Bollinger?
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
with regard to the Boston and Maine Corp. property, is the intent for the city to acquire that, if it has not already done so, for the bike trail?
It is
Yeah.
acquired already.
It is acquired, so that is that a notation that needs to be made on the plan, that the city of Nashua is the owner, or, and then I do have a follow-up to that as well, which would be, is the applicant amenable to, I don't know if a fence is presently there, I don't know if there's landscaping there, just to speak to Mr. Weber's point, if there is any sort of noise or other intrusion upon the bike path, I didn't know if the applicant had any plans to address that.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna come to the meeting next week about that.
This meeting.
Okay.
There is a concern about the bike path going back there because there is no fence or nothing like that. Right now, I have big cement blocks for my border of the back of the property. That rail trail, right now is just all overgrown brush. Nobody's take care of it. I think, actually, somebody from Liberty Utilities came in and they bush hogged the whole thing. But, I mean, you got the old railroad trestle bridge that's there. That's, I don't know if that's safe or not, but it's been there for probably 100 years. But I would want to, just one of the questions is I'd hope they put a fence up if they do something along that rail trail. Right now, there's no problems. I got nobody walking by there going into my property. But I'm afraid that if that becomes a bike path or walking path, that's something we have to deal with in the future, so.
Would that be incumbent upon the city to construct such a fence, or?
Well, we have a meeting
Okay.
for Wednesday night, and that's definitely something that, hearing the concerns of the board, that I will definitely bring up. I will be at that meeting, and I could bring it up about safety concerns and whether or not there'll be fencing there.
Okay, thank you.
There is a slope issue along that side of the property. And so I'm sure the city will want to look at some sort of barrier there. What it is will be decided at the design phase.
Just getting back to my first question, though, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Is that a notation that needs to be corrected on the plan with regard to a Boston and Maine Core? I'm looking at, drawing number 1 of 1.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
plan
they
should be correct.
changed. Should be changed. They should.
Thank you.
Was that an administrative request that we can deal with, or should we, is that worthy of a stipulation of any sort?
Well, I mean, it's just a conditional use permit, right? So, I
Right.
mean, the plan is for reference purposes, right? I mean,
Right.
it's not.
Right.
Well, actually,
We can
yeah.
just amend it administratively.
Right, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking, okay. yeah,
Question.
yeah. Mr. Weber?
Did you say that was where your mortar was housed?
My what?
Next to the rail trail, was that, what did you say was right next to that?
Oh, right next to the rail trail is where I have my topsoil pile, my fill pile, and then there's a rock wall, like,
Okay, so
big
no
cement blocks.
contaminants would run off into that? No contaminants that would?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
you're, like I said, you're probably a couple 100 feet away from the rail trail.
Yeah,
So,
no, I'm just saying right
yeah.
next to it, it slopes down.
No, there's nothing there that's gonna contaminate it, no. Actually, I'm lower than the rail trail,
Oh, okay,
so you'd be sloping, contaminants are coming into me.
thank you.
Any other questions on the board? No? Okay, I think we're all set. All right, so any other questions for staff? All right, at this point, I'll go ahead and close the hearing, move into the meeting, so pretty straightforward, conditional special use permit. We've got the outlined conditions in the packet. We've had a little bit of discussions. Seems like most of the issues have been talked through, and, there may be further when the rail trail comes through, but that's sort of a further thing down the road as far as I'm concerned. Anybody have any other discussion items they want to talk about, or is someone ready to make a motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, my sense on the, with the rail trail fence is that if the rail trail is gonna run from downtown to this area of town, it's part of the city's responsibility, rather than having the individual property owners make a decision piece by piece. That should be something the city should look at in developing the rail trail. So,
Okay.
I don't think we should require anything of the applicant at this time. If there's no other discussion, I'm happy to make a motion.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's always the prerogative of the applicant if they want to put their own up, they can, but yeah, go ahead and make a motion, sure.
So I make a motion that the planning board should make a determination that this plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-133F, and that they're without any stipulations.
Okay, so we have a motion by Alderman Tenza to approve the plan with no stipulations. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Ballinger. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes. All right, thanks. Okay, so moving on, new business subdivision plans.
Thank you.
Yep. Case number 3, JJN Realty Trust owner. Application and acceptance of proposed 2-lot subdivision. This property is located at 301 Pine Street. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at this application and make a motion as to whether it's ready to take jurisdiction?
I'll make a motion that this plan is ready for us to take jurisdiction.
Just got a motion by Mr. Varley to take jurisdiction. Do you have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. That motion passes. All right. So whenever you're ready, Mr. Maynard.
All set, Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Go ahead.
For the record, my name is Richard Maynard, professional engineer with Maynard Paquette of Nashua, representing the property owners and applicants, JJN Realty Trust. The property of concern is located at 301 Pine Street at the corner of Hunt Street, also known as Lot 151, Sheet 102. Property is a lot of 15,000 square feet containing one single-family home, proposed to be subdivided into two lots, a 9,000 square foot lot for the existing house and a 6,000 square foot for a new building lot. The property is served by city water and sewer. Stormwater management will be accomplished by installing leach and catch basin to the rear of the proposed house on the future building lot. The remaining engineering comments that were just issued involve the driveway plus the sewer and the other utility connections, which can only be addressed at the time of building permit when the actual house size, arrangement, and location are known. There are 3 waivers to consider: existing conditions within 1,000 feet, underground utilities, and a sidewalk waiver in lieu of a contribution of 10,700 square feet. Thank you.
Could you just go over that contribution one time? What was the number?
Yeah, there's 250 feet.
Yep.
It's a corner lot plus the side lots in an excessive amount of frontage, but it's 250 less 2 driveways at 36, which comes down to 214 times 50 comes 10,007. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Yep, that's great. Appreciate it. Okay. And then, Mr. Maynard, you've had a chance to see the latest sheet from this Joe Mendola. It's just a few comments left on that.
Yes,
You've reviewed that.
they have to do with the driveway and the sewer service. Until we have the house layout and then know the actual house, we can't do that, and those are typically done at building permit anyway. So those are fairly straightforward.
Okay. All right. So you have no issues with them?
I have no issues with those, no.
Okay. Anybody from the board have any questions for Mr. Maynard? Mr. Peterson?
Question, not necessarily for the applicant, but for the board. Does the sidewalk in lieu of rule apply to the entire property, both the original lot and the subdivided lot, or just the subdivided lot? You know, are we counting all of
He's
the, all of the
he's counting all of it.
footage, or just the new lot?
He's counting all of it minus 2 driveways.
Okay, so that's exactly what the applicant proposed.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Let me just make sure I've got the right case here. Yeah, I had a question. We did receive a letter from the direct abutter. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, I've seen that.
I just wondered if you could address any plans you may have for screening between the lots.
Well, first of all, the neighbor has absolutely no vegetation, no trees, no shrubbery along her lot line, which is the chain link fence. If you see the landscape plan, it calls for a few trees to be planted there, but beyond that, no. There's no screening required or regulated with regard to between single-family homes in Nashua. So it's more of the neighbor is disappointed that now that the wooded lot next door is gonna have a house on it. That's really what the complaint is, and it's really nothing we should be doing anything about it. That's everybody's right to clear their own lot, so, thank you.
Sorry, did you say there's, maybe I missed it. You said there's a landscaping plan?
No, on drawing number 3 in the upper right-hand corner,
Yeah.
Okay,
Top right, yeah.
which is the one I posted up there to the right.
got it, okay,
Those are pretty much standard landscaping, there's nothing fancy.
right.
Okay. Mr. Weber?
Questions. Is the frontage for the sidewalks, is that not just one side, is that to the entire lot?
Yeah, you just
Right,
asked
that's-
that.
yeah.
Yes, I didn't hear it clearly. In some cases, we have just done just the one side, even though it was a corner lot, we have done just the front one street in lieu of. We've done that before. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there for the
Yeah,
board.
It's not a typical case that we've done, but,
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about that in the meeting if you
Okay,
want. It's not a
thank you.
hearing issue.
Yeah,
Well,
can
it's in
do.
the board's discretion on these corner lot,
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That we can discuss.
and so
Yeah.
when you deliberate, that's something to take up. It is quite a bit of frontage and a quite large contribution for one single-family house. Normally, it's like in the range of 3,000 or 5,000 for these one-lot subdivisions, so it is a little punitive.
Are there questions for the applicant?
No.
No? Any questions for staff? Ms. Alderman Tenza?
I have a question, and
Sure.
so stop me if we're not able to do this, but would the applicant, in lieu for a reduction in the sidewalk contributions, be willing to consider putting in some kind of privacy trees between there?
Alderman Tenza, that's a
And
very
I'm-
inappropriate question.
Yeah, I don't think. that's
Very
something
inappropriate.
we would do.
Yeah, we can't do it.
But that's, yeah.
I mean, I think would have been a resolution to make both
You
parties
can't be making
happy.
those kind of trades, no.
No, we can certainly talk about a fence if we want one, and,
Yeah,
But,
well, we
yeah, I
can.
think independent of sidewalk.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? Okay, I think we're set with you at the moment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern with the plan? Go ahead and come on up, state your name and address for the record, please.
Peter Schaefer, 15 East Street. I'm actually not that familiar with this property, but it's Pine Street, and that's downtown, right? I mean, wouldn't you normally have sidewalks downtown? I would be surprised that I mean, it's a high-density area, it seems to me, for people, so I'm just wondering why you would have put a sidewalk there. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can explain to you that typically we don't put pieces of sidewalks in the middle of areas that don't have them. But, you know, so that's typically why we might not, so.
Right, and as a condition to the waiver is no sidewalks within 250 feet, so.
Right, so there aren't any within 250 feet of this property at the moment, so, but we can certainly consider that. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Any further questions by the board for the applicant? Or for staff? No? Okay. Hearing none, at this point, I'll close the hearing and move into the meeting. So, so pretty typical two-lot subdivision that we have in front of us. We see a bunch of these. Does have a corner lot. You know, I think that applying the sidewalk calculation the way that it's been presented by the applicant, which includes both frontages, I think is the appropriate way. But I'm welcome to have any discussion by anybody else.
That is,
but-
I mean, that's how we've sort of consistently looked at it, whether it's, you
I don't
know,
want to change something.
And then, you know, there was the one abutter comment with regard to, you know, screening. I tend to agree to some extent with two-lot subdivisions, you know, I mean, there's there's an adjacent property as well that could put their own,
Yeah.
their own screening on there as well, so, you know, it's not, that's not an atypical situation that we run into, but
No,
I welcome any comments or any questions, any discussion points.
yeah, I mean, I would have the same view, generally speaking. I mean, and this is not by any means the first time that, you know, someone has raised this issue when we've had, you know, these types of subdivisions where it's, you know, it's been an empty lot for however many years, and it's been wooded, and it's been great for the neighbor, and I appreciate that, you know, that's unfortunate for them to lose it, but the reality is, you know, they never had control of it, even if they had, you know, that perception of it. And, you know, again, you know, even if this lot weren't being subdivided, they could have taken all the trees down. So, and if just looking at the approval criteria, I mean, it's not, the one item that sort of contemplates this sort of issue is item number 4. But that really talks about buffering between dissimilar adjacent land uses. So, where you've got already a pretty dense neighborhood of single-family homes on relatively small lots, I'm not sure that there's necessarily that there's a legitimate basis for saying, yeah, you have to put buffering in here when you're talking about, building another single-family home.
Yeah, if we want to discuss any of the other waivers too, the first one is a pretty common one that, showing features at 1,000 feet out in a neighborhood like this is not usually very useful. And the underground utilities, it's overhead in the area already, so that's a pretty typical one for us too, if it's in there. So if anybody wants to make a motion, you just make sure you address those 2 waivers, as well as, the waiver on the sidewalks should include the dollar value that's been stated, the 10,700.
Yeah, and just
then-
one other item, at number 7, I think that should be updated to September 27th.
Correct. Yeah, that there's a newer one. Yeah, so. Any further discussion? Anybody willing to make a motion? Mr. Barley?
I'll make a motion to approve new business number 3 subdivision plan, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in subdivision NRO section 190-138G, with a total of 11 stipulations. Stipulation 1 being a waiver request with respect to showing physical features on the site within 1,000 feet. That waiver to read is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Stipulation number 2 being a waiver request, requesting a waiver from the requirement to provide for underground utilities. That should read is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Stipulation number 3 also being a waiver request with respect to sidewalks on the property, and that should read is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation, and the applicant has agreed to make a contribution in the amount of $10,700 in lieu of sidewalk construction. 4 through 6, reading is written in the staff report. 7 to be amended to refer to a letter from Joe Mandola dated September 27th, 2019, and then 8 through 11, reading is written in the staff report.
Okay, so we have that motion to approve, new business number 3, the stipulations as stated, by Mr. Barley. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? Mr. Ballinger.
One item,
Sure.
Mr. Chair, on number 7, it's a small thing. Should it read letter or email? I think there's an email from Joe Mandola in our packet. I don't know if a formal letter was issued, and I don't know if,
It does say email.
I think, yeah, all comments in an email.
got an
Oh,
email.
I might have said letter.
oh, no, that's okay.
mistakenly, but-
No, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It does
so we're
actually
good.
say email
Okay.
stipulation.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes. Thanks. Yep. Okay, moving on. New business subdivision plan, case number 4. Bruce Kinville, owner, application and acceptance of proposed 2-lot subdivision. This property is located at 21.5 Fairmount Street. Has anybody had a chance to look at this application and make a motion as to whether or not this case is ready for jurisdiction? To take jurisdiction. We have a motion to take jurisdiction by Mr. Weber. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Varley. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes. Okay.
Alderman Tenza, are you going to recuse yourself?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
I need to recuse myself on this matter as a result of Attorney Leonard being involved in my professional relationship with him.
Okay, sure, thanks. Just hang on one sec, and then. Okay, we're ready.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Steve Auger. I'm a project manager with Hayner Swanson, and our office is located at 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. I'm here before you tonight representing Mr. Bruce Kinville, who is in the audience with me tonight. Also in the audience is Attorney Jay Leonard, providing legal counsel for Mr. Kinville. We've come before you seeking approval for a 1-into-2 subdivision of the tract located at 21.5 Fairmount Street. Some lot information. It is lot 190, map 62. It's .543 acres in size and zoned RB, urban residence. It's kind of a unique shaped lot. It has 2 frontages. If you look at the plan I put on the board on the left, it has a very small frontage right on Fairmount Street. And if you've ever driven by it, you'll see that that's basically just a driveway that accesses the existing house. That frontage is a hair under 15 feet. The majority of the frontage on the site is on Paxton Terrace. The existing house is serviced by a septic system, water by Penachuk, propane, and overhead electric and telephone utilities. The abutters to the site are all residential uses. To the north, east, and south, and to the west of the site is a B&M railroad bed, and then just on the other side of the railroad bed is the Broad Street Parkway. We have received 2 variances for this project back on April 9th of this year. The first one was for lot frontage, where 50 feet was required and 45.9 feet was approved, and for lot width, where 60 feet was required and 48.77 feet was approved. And if you look at the plan on the left, both of those variances were for the lot that is going to have the existing house, and they involve the portion of frontage that's on Paxton Terrace. Utilities for the lot. The new lot will be serviced by municipal sewer, which will be pumped up to Paxton Terrace, water by Penachuk, and there is an existing Penachuk water easement along the very north part of the new lot. So we spoke to Penachuk about that. We'll be tapping into their line right from our lot, so it'll be one less cut we have to make in the street. The new lot will be serviced by gas, and we'll be putting our electric and telephone utilities underground on that as well. The existing house lot, because of the location of the current septic system, which will wind up on the new lot, we're going to be tying that into municipal sewer as well as part of this project.
On Paxton?
Yep. Yeah. So they'll, because the proposed new lot has a duplex on it, there will be 2 sewer connections coming out of that one, and then a third one running into the back of the existing house to replace the existing septic system.
Okay.
Some site characteristics. We're proposing a duplex because we're in the RB zone, and the RB and the RC zones are the only ones in the city where duplexes are permitted without a special exception being granted by the zoning board. And then if you look at the amount of lots that actually front on Paxton, there are 16 lots. 14 of those are existing duplexes. So by putting a duplex on the new raw land lot, we'll be fitting in with what the character of the neighborhood is. There is a bit of a steep hill on the lot as it goes up to Paxton Terrace, so we handled that hill by we designed the house to push it into the hill as much as we can. So so as not to bring the driveway all the way down to the bottom of the site. So we're trying to handle that slope as much as we can by making the back of the existing duplex will be a walkout. So that's how we worked with the grades to deal with the change from Paxton down to the bottom of the site. Stormwater management, we have behind the proposed duplex, we have designed a stormwater management area to handle any runoff that comes down the hill. We've submitted that to the engineering department, and our design meets all the requirements of the stormwater regulations of the National Land Use Code. As Ms. McGee mentioned in communications earlier, we've received 2 letters from the engineering department concerning technical review comments. We've responded to both of those. The most recent one today, and I also spoke to Mr. Mendola on the phone today. His second letter, which we responded to today, they were really just some minor housekeeping comments from the first letter. And I expressed to him, should we receive approval tonight when we have to revise the final plans for submittal, those will be taken care of at that time. So we have responded to everything we've received from engineering, and we believe we've met their conditions that they wanted revised. We are requesting 2 waivers. The first one is for sidewalks. And when you basically do the new math for the frontage calculations, it comes out to our contribution is $3,744. I can run through how that was calculated for you if you'd like.
Sure, that would be good.
We have, when you add up our total frontage along Paxton, and then the little bit of frontage along Fairmount Street, we have 110.88 feet in frontage. We subtracted out 36 feet, which is 2 18-feet driveways. That brings us down to 74.88 feet in frontage. And we have, when you look at Paxton and Fairmount, there's no sidewalk directly across from us on either of those streets, so we don't have any additional subtractions. So when you take 74.88 and multiply it by 50, that's where we generate 3,744.
Okay.
And then the second waiver request we're asking for is one of the typical ones, as you've mentioned. It's the existing conditions within 1,000 feet of the site. We believe the site is being developed in a responsible manner in accordance with the land use code. The recommended conditions of approval are acceptable to us and our client, and we respectfully seek your approval at this time, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that the board may have.
Can you explain the nature of the retaining walls or anything that are being constructed on the site?
Oh, we showed, if you look at the plan on the right,
Yeah.
to the very north of the building, we showed a small retaining wall there. Basically, the point of it is we could have graded out that side slope, which is kind of a swale to bring stormwater down to the stormwater management area. We could have graded out a little steeper, but we're trying to keep the area between where the driveway ends and just to the left of the house. We're trying to make that a little flatter. So we put in about a 3 to 4 foot high retaining wall, just basically that kind of runs parallel to the house. And then we're just showing some steps down from that retaining wall to get to the bottom of the land.
Okay. Is it 4 foot or 3 foot or?
I believe it's 4 feet.
Okay, 4 feet. All right. And then the stormwater basin in the back, is there any, can you explain the design of that? Is there any outlet from it, or is it designed to capture
No,
everything?
it's just infiltration. So it's kind of like for lack of a better word, a bowl in the backyard.
Right.
And we graded the lot so that on either side of the house, the stormwater is going to swale down both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
We graded the driveway so that nothing's going to pitch towards the garages. It's going to funnel off on both sides of the driveway and get into those swales and just circumvent everything and wind up at the bottom into the detention area.
Okay. And just because it's hard for me to see the depth, the elevation, the depth of the stormwater retention basin from,
It's only a few feet deep.
Just a
It's-
few feet,
Yeah, I
okay.
mean, we didn't need a whole lot.
it'll just be grass?
Yep.
Okay. You said that the utilities, you were coming underground from Paxton for the new duplex?
Yes.
Are there any changes to the utilities on the existing house other than the sanitary line?
No.
Okay, and those come from where?
The water comes, I believe it runs down the driveway from Fairmount Street.
Yep.
And then the existing house for electric and telephone, that actually has overhead, which runs from behind the house to a power pole that fronts on Paxton.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Is there any thought about it putting any, I mean, you're digging quite a bit from that, like a set of conduits or something for future underground, or?
Yeah, I mean, kind of just because we are digging, we're doing a fair amount of digging in, roughly a small area. We kind of wanted to minimize what we're doing and trying not to jam everything in there. So, I mean, the house, the house functions fine with overhead electric, and water's not an issue because it comes
Right.
in from Fairmount, so.
Okay. All right. Any questions, Mr. Weber?
The retaining wall is gonna be a building permit, so somebody's gonna be inspecting it, correct?
Honestly, I'm not sure how the building permit process works.
Okay.
I mean, that's gonna be for the land developer or the contractor, or the home builder to deal with, whatever permits they have to get, they'll get.
Okay. So you're not sure of who would be inspecting all your civil engineered stuff?
Mr. Weber, there's a stipulation in the staff report about an engineering affidavit for this.
Okay,
so-
then I don't have to ask that.
Have you reviewed that stipulation?
Yep, I mean, whoever, winds up building this, I mean, certainly if they wanted to hire us to do, construction inspections as, each aspect of the site is built, then we would, we'd be able to comply with that, but
Right.
it's something
Yeah,
that,
but-
we would need to see everything built, as
Sure.
it goes along. No one, whoever builds it, they don't have to hire us. They can hire,
But the
another
applicant
engineer
doesn't have an
or-
issue with the requirement for the engineering affidavit for the as-constructed condition as is in the staff report.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, I think we might be all set at the moment.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Anybody in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Hearing none, I give the board another opportunity to ask any questions of the applicant or staff during the hearing.
Mr. Weber? Oh, the answer is, a retaining wall over 4 feet would have to get a building permit.
Yeah,
4 feet
I
or
knew
more.
that.
Okay, so,
Okay, thanks. Okay, so if there's no more questions from the board, I'm gonna go ahead and close the hearing and move to the meeting. So we've got a subdivision here with a duplex. We've talked about some utilities, we've talked about some drainage. There is a stormwater report that's made it through the engineering department. We have an updated letter from the city engineer, so I would just say if anybody is contemplating a motion for stipulation number 7, it really should be dated September 30th now, because the applicant has addressed some of the earlier comments. The sidewalk contribution to me appears consistent with our typical application of it.
What was that? So I can just write it down.
$3,744.
Yeah, and there is obviously a second waiver, which is a common one for us with regard to the plan extending out to 1,000 feet, which we routinely approve for, this type of subdivision. But, so does anybody have any other discussion points that want to go over? Okay. Anybody willing to make a motion? Mr. Varley?
I'll make a motion to approve new business number 4 subdivision plan, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in subdivision NRO section 190-138G, with a total of 8 stipulations. The first stipulation being a waiver request with respect to sidewalks. That waiver should read, is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation, as the applicant has agreed to make a contribution in the amount of $3,744 in lieu of sidewalk construction. The second stipulation also being a waiver request with respect to showing existing conditions within 1,000 feet. That stipulation also is to read, is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Stipulations 3 through 6, as written in the staff report. Stipulation number 7 to be amended to indicate that the email from Joe Mandola is dated September 30th, 2019, and stipulation 8 as written in the staff report.
Okay, so we have that motion to approve with the 8 stipulations as outlined by Mr. Varley. Do we have a second for that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballinger. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? That motion passes. Thanks. All right, so moving on, we're gonna go to new business site plan, case number 5. Michael and Julianne Atkins, Crimson Properties LLC. Application and acceptance of proposed site plan to construct 7 residential units and associated site improvements. This property is located at 1086 West Hollis Street. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at this report and an application, excuse me, and want to make a motion as to whether we're ready to take jurisdiction? Mr. Marley?
Mr. Chairman, I would just indicate that we had noticed that there are some significant additional substantive materials that were in our packet this evening that we haven't really had a chance to go over yet. But we understand that Attorney Westgate is here to speak to some of those issues, and so I would suggest with that understanding, I would make a motion to accept jurisdiction, but with the further understanding that, you know, if we don't feel satisfied that we have all the information we need, that we always have the option to table the matter for further consideration.
Okay, so we have that motion to take jurisdiction. The additional comments are by Mr. Varley. Do we have a second on that first? Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? So I would just add to, you know, and this is, you know, for us and sort of the applicant, there is definitely a significant amount of information that's sort of been put in front of us in the last, you know, a few minutes before the meeting. But we'll do our best to sort of get through that and understand it, and see where we end up, so. I guess all those in favor of taking jurisdiction?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? That motion passes. Okay, so, yeah, maybe you can start with the site plan, go over that, and then if you've got some folks here that can talk to the additional information that we've got tonight, then that would be good to follow up with that.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Tom Zajac. I'm a civil engineer with Hayner Swanson, 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. Here tonight representing Crimson Properties LLC at 1086 West Hollis Street. Also with me here tonight is Randy Termel, who is the developer for Crimson Properties, and also attorney Brad Westgate from Weiner and Bennett. We're here tonight seeking site plan approval for a 7-unit, single-family detached residential development to be known as Applewood Estates. Again, as I mentioned, located off of West Hollis Street. Just like to provide a brief overview, and then Attorney Westgate is going to come up and speak to his memo, and the two of us would be happy to then answer any questions from either the board or the public regarding the project. If you look at the plan on the left on the board and the plan on the screen, shows an aerial map of the property, 1086 West Hollis Street. located in the westerly part of the site near the Hollis Town line. Map 41, Lot 500. It's about 4.26 acres. It's a somewhat uniquely shaped parcel. Again, we'll kind of speak to that a little later on. R30 zone, we're abutted by West Hollis Street to the north, and existing single-family properties basically to all other sides of us. The site is the location of a former gravel pit. I think you can see on the aerial photo, kind of in the central rear portion of the site, you can see evidence of that. As I understand it, the gravel pit hasn't been in operation since the late 80s, early 90s, and has really sat undeveloped since that time. The property contains varying topography. In looking at older USGS maps, the main body of the site generally sloped in a northeasterly direction prior to the gravel operation. Since the gravel operation, there is kind of a low point in the central part of the site due to that work. And then the southwesterly portion of the site contains a little bit steeper of topography. If you're looking at the plans, it's kind of the finger that extends towards the bottom. There are no wetlands present on the site. There were numerous test pits performed as part of this project, and we've also done soil mapping throughout the site, indicate deep sandy soils with very favorable conditions for both septic design and stormwater management. If you look at the plans to the right, the color display plan and the master site plan, I'll switch here on the screen to the display plan. So this is what we're proposing, as I mentioned, a 7-unit, single-family detached residential development to be known as Applewood Estates. The project is being developed in accordance with the city's conservation subdivision regulations, NRO 190-40. I'll touch on a couple points there related to that section of the regulation. The property will remain as a single lot in a condominium type of ownership. Access to the site is provided via a new private cul-de-sac to be known as Brayburn Drive. The street is 28 feet wide and about 400 feet long. The proposed units will be a mix of 1- and 2-story, 3-bedroom units, craftsman-style homes. We are showing a rather generous footprint for these buildings. The final layout of these buildings have not been designed, but they will fit within these blocks that we're showing, and will generally range between 1,600 to 2,400 square feet. Each unit will contain a 2-car garage and individual driveways off of the new private road. Associated site improvements include new curbing, landscaping, site lighting, utility infrastructure, and stormwater management. The units will be serviced by private septic located on site, water by Pennachuck Waterworks, underground propane, and underground electric and telecommunications utilities. The remaining lands outside of the roads, units, and driveways will remain as open space and will be maintained under the rules of the condominium association. So I've got 3 kind of key site elements that I'd like to talk to you about tonight, or we would like to talk to you about. The first one is the paper streets, and Attorney Westgate is going to come up after me and speak to those in more detail. I think you got a long memo in your packets tonight, and we'd be happy to kind of go through the history of the site. There is a unique history. This piece was part of a bigger subdivision that was subdivided, consolidated, and then re-subdivided. And as you can see, the remaining lots around our property have all been developed with single-family homes, and we've got this uniquely shaped property here in the middle of them that we're here for tonight. Attorney Westgate's memo supplements the notes that are on our existing conditions plan. There are 3 paper streets that are shown on our existing conditions plan: Woolworth, Colonial, and Woolen. And as I mentioned, after I'm done speaking, Attorney Westgate will be up to kind of go through those various paper streets and answer any questions that you have. It is our hope here tonight to address any concerns that you have, any remaining questions, and one of the stipulations of approval, number 4, we feel like is a little vaguely written. And now that we've provided the memo and also our testimony here tonight, we're hoping to strike that condition if we're lucky enough to get approved. That paper streets being one, the second is the conservation subdivision regulation. So NRO section 190-40 outlines the various regulation. It basically the goal of that section is to provide a more compact cluster-style development that allows the developer to get the same number of units he would as a conventional subdivision or a conventional development with less roads, less infrastructure, and more open space. We are seeking a bonus density as allowed under the regulation by providing the playground area. There's a calculation there which mandates a certain size per unit for that playground area. It's shown on our plan, but I did want to mention that. And again, all areas of the site outside of the proposed roads, units, driveways, and playground area will remain as common open space that also meets the conservation land criteria. The open space provided exceeds both the minimums for the R30 zone and for the conservation land itself under those specific regulations. The last item I'd like to just highlight is stormwater, which is always a very critical aspect of any project. Our approach is to take advantage of the sandy soils located throughout the property by promoting recharge as best we can. Runoff from the majority of the development, including the road and the driveways and the units, will be captured and directed into one of 3 proposed infiltration practices. Stormwater Management A is an underground infiltration system, a storm tech unit, as you see at many sites, the yellow prefabricated chambers that will sit in a bed of crushed stone. That's going to be located underneath the proposed playground towards the rear of the site. There'll be 2 small infiltration basins located in the front of the site, Stormwater B and Stormwater C. Again, these will pick up runoff from the front portion of the road and the units and the surrounding lawn areas. The combination of these practices, along with the favorable soil conditions, will provide ample storage, treatment, and of post-development runoff in order to meet the city's stormwater regulations. Mr. Chair, we did submit a letter for one waiver request here tonight as part of the projects. It's related to sidewalks. My letter dated September 18th, 2019. If I could, I'd just like to kind of paraphrase NRO 190-212. We're really requesting, there's 2 components of this. We're requesting a waiver of internal sidewalks. So this is a low-volume residential road. There's only 7 units off of it. It's a dead-end cul-de-sac. There'll be no cut-through traffic. We kind of had the option of going with a narrower roadway with a sidewalk, or what we decided to do is a slightly wider roadway, 28 feet, without a sidewalk, thinking that the road is wide enough in this low volume so that the vehicles and the pedestrians would be able to share that space. We do know that the fire department vastly prefers the 28-foot wide road, specifically if there's street parking. It gives them a little more comfort to get in and out of the site. And of course, being part of the conservation subdivision, we're trying to minimize the amount of impervious area. We felt like a sidewalk for 7 units internally was not the best way to go. The second component is we're requesting a waiver and contribution in lieu of sidewalks along the property's frontage. There's no sidewalks, never mind within 250 feet, a mile in each direction. This is a very rural road with wide shoulders, and there's no sidewalks in sight. We agree with staff that the contribution can be used elsewhere in this, either along this West Hollis Street corridor, where there's existing resources, or within the many city-owned trails in the southwest quadrant of the city. I think my waiver letter mentions in amount 11,200. Staff has slightly modified that to 11,700, which is fine with us. So in summary, Mr. Chair, we believe that we're before you with a site plan that is complete and conforms with the regulation. We feel like this is a good application of a cluster-style development that will fit well within a predominantly single-family residential neighborhood. We did receive comments late last Friday from Mr. Mendola of the engineering department. I will say there's a high number of comments, but in reviewing them and addressing them this week, I don't think there's anything significant there that's going to impact our design, our plans, or require us to ask for any waivers or anything like that. We have since revised plans and resubmitted those back to planning and back to engineering as soon as we could. And I'm confident that we can address any lingering comments with Mr. Mendola if we're lucky enough to get approval from you folks tonight. The conditions outlined in the staff report are acceptable to us, with the exception of number 4. We're hoping that that can be removed. Again, I feel like the way the stipulation is written, it's a little vague and onerous for the applicant. And so I'm hoping the combination of the memo submitted by Attorney Westgate and, more importantly, his testimony and answering questions here tonight will give you the satisfaction that we could remove that stipulation. Our client is sensitive to the fact that this is an infill development. He's worked very hard to meet with most or all of his direct abutters to introduce the project, answer questions, and resolve any concerns. As a result, we've submitted a number of letters of support that appear in your packets tonight. So, thank you very much, and like I said, we're seeking your approval tonight. Attorney Westgate's going to come up to speak to his memo. I'm not sure if you want to ask me any questions now or wait till after.
It might be good to hear from Attorney Westgate first, and then we'll kind of go back.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Ballinger.
I'm just going to ask
Yep.
one question. Prior to Mr. Westgate speaking to property ownership matters, do you have an existing conditions plan that you could show on the screen? Is one available to show the?
I have
It's
one.
in our packet, but it may be useful if you're speaking to the 3 paper streets show as depicted in our packet.
Yes, I do. I have a colored one in my file, so let me grab that and I'll put it right there.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Attorney Westgate, yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name's Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Weiner & Bennett, 111 Concord Street, Nashua, representing Crimson Properties LLC, the applicant. I'll wait till Mr. Zajak's able to put up the existing conditions plan.
Okay, thanks. Oh, yeah.
Just takes a second.
Yeah, you can lift it like a little, there you go, yep. That should work. Yep. Thanks. Okay.
No, thank you. I'll try to address the paper streets issue, and it really kind of relates to, I think, a email that was sent in on Monday to staff from Walter Charpentier. The kind of two concepts go together. Mr. Charpentier's company, DCWC Holdings LLC, is the owner of a property known as Lot 223. If you look at the existing conditions plan, it's a little tough to pick out, but it's, I'm going to, if I may point. It's a sort of triangular piece of property that's located just above the elbow, the first turn on the blue paper street. He's the owner of his company is the owner of that property. The site is the rest of the property that you see, but I'm going to outline that with my finger as well, if I may, just for everyone's benefit.
You want to take the mic?
Yeah, you can grab the mic if you want to.
Sorry?
You can grab the mic
Oh,
and pull it
okay,
out if you
yeah.
wanted to.
I'll be right back to it.
Okay, thanks.
So that's the site, and as you can recall from the site plan that Mr. Zajac was talking about, the houses and the road effectively go up the yellow line that you see. So the proposed Brayburn Drive is essentially in the same locus as the discontinued street of Woolworth Avenue or Woolworth Street, the yellow street in the middle of the plan, with the houses being off both ends, cul-de-sacing at the end to the right. I thought it made sense to get a memo into your files that sort of comprehensively talked about the paper street issue, but as succinctly as I possibly could. Frankly, more pages of the memo are exhibits than the text of the memo itself. And I think that's been brought to your attentions in your packets. The question that, the issue that Mr. Charpentier raised is his concern that this plan would landlock Lot 223. In short, that's not the case. Lot 223 is not landlocked because his property has a private right of access over the old location of Woolen Drive as a paper street. Again, Woolen Drive is the blue paper street. From West Hollis Street up the blue to Mr. Charpentier's property, he has a private right of access over that because of the nature in which paper streets are dealt with and the law that controls them. And the memo I submitted summarizes that, and I'll walk you through that. Won't take all that long. It's important to note that we recognize this private right of access in the existing conditions plan. Note number 7 in the existing conditions plan deals with Woolen Drive, the color coding for the note to the particular paper street. And in the last sentence of note number 7 on the existing conditions plan, it states, that portion of the drive located between lots 230 and 224, those are 2 lots on West Hollis Street, and over the subject would still exist as a private way. So the idea is, and it's pretty clear under the law, that even if a paper street is discontinued by action of a city or 20 years passed and it was never built or opened up and used by the public, even though the public ability to use a paper street expires because of discontinuance or the expiration of 20 years, the rights of parties who own lots shown on the subdivision plan that created the paper street don't expire. Those private rights of access still exist. If you take a look at the memo, I attached, I think, 3 plans to it. One was the original subdivision plan. I think it's Plan 16-274. I think that's the first plan that I attached to the memo. And when you look at it, it's in this, essentially the same orientation as the plan that we have up on the video screen. If you take a look at it, you can see Mr. Charpentier's property, Lot 19, on the old plan. And you can see Woolworth Avenue, it's called Woolworth Avenue on this 16-274 plan. You can also see Woolen Drive and Colonial Avenue, which is up in the upper right side of the plans. The lots that are shown on that plan, in effect, have private rights of access to the extent that they need them for practical purposes. So where Woolen Drive is shown on that plan, Mr. Charpentier's property has a private right of access over Woolen Drive, even though it expired as a public servitude, became a paper street that no longer has public impact. Theoretically, he also has the right of access on the other side of Woolen Drive from Gilson Road straight across and up and over to his property. our project doesn't involve any of the property on that side of Woolen Drive. The board, I think, is aware that when streets are platted on a subdivision plan that you typically see, and back in the 60s, by the way, the city engineer approved subdivision plans. This particular one was approved in 65 by the city engineer. But I think the board's well aware that when a subdivision plan goes before you and it plats streets, the platting of those streets creates what we call a public servitude. So in effect, a subdivider, a property owner, is dedicating to the public use the streets that he plats, shows on a plan. They're paper streets at that moment because nothing's been built yet. But the very platting on an approved plan creates that public servitude. However, that public servitude can go away. It goes away typically in two ways. One is the Board of Aldermen discontinues the paper street. So it decides that there's no use has been put to it, it's never been accepted by the city, it's not been maintained by the city. The property owner petitions, the Board of Aldermen may discontinue it. But under the statute that regulates paper streets, RSA 23151, they also go away, they're extinguished by the passage of time. 20 years is the time frame. The law was at that time that if a paper street was not opened or used or maintained by the city for 20 years, it automatically expired, it extinguished. The law changed in '89, requiring that even if 20 years passed, the Board of Aldermen or town meeting would have to affirmatively discontinue it. But that was not the law in 65 up to 1969, hence the 20-year expiration of these paper streets. So in the memo, I tried to describe the status of each of the paper streets, effectively concluding that with respect to Woolworth Avenue and Colonial, the yellow and the green, there's no practical functionality of those paper streets nor need for their use by any of the lots shown on the 16274 subdivision plan from 1965. But that's a little different with respect to the blue Woolen Avenue paper street because of Mr. Charpentier's property, hence our recognition of his private rights of access over it. Mr. Charpentier in his email raises concerns or questions about a couple of plans that were of record, one of which that inadvertently assumed his lot into what's called Lot 500, our project that we're doing, and another one which is a corrective plan from that. In Mr. Charpentier's chain of title, his company's deeds, at least a couple of them, if not more, probably all, use the plan that he references. The second plan he references, I think it's 28327, I want to say. It references, he uses that plan in his conveyance into his company. So his deed into his company is based on one of the two plans he's referencing in his memo to depict his lot as a lot that was transferred to him. But that's also an academic point because his property is depicted as Lot 19 on the 1965 plan. It was a separate lot created by that 1965 plan in the first place. The irony of all of this is that the plan before you tonight for Applewood Estates is probably the only plan, at least the only one I've seen, and I suspect the only one of record, or would be of record, that actually acknowledges the private rights of access that Mr. Charpentier has to Lot 19. So rather than landlocking his property by tonight's plan, we're actually acknowledging the rights that he has and doing no violence to them. None of the other plans of record even note that, to my knowledge. So in our mind, there's no issue between us and Mr. Charpentier. We know what his rights are. We reference them in the existing conditions plan in note number 7. We honor that and recognize it exists. Any other issues that may sort of spring out of this, if you will, really are civil matters between abutting property owners. That leads to our request that condition number 4 not be part of the conditions of approval if the board so chooses to approve this plan. And we would respectfully request that condition 4 be stricken as a condition of approval. Just a few final thoughts on that. I suspect that condition 4 was inserted by staff very judiciously, perhaps out of an abundance of caution, to make certain that the board was aware that concerns were raised about the status of the paper street, in particular as it pertained to lot 223, Mr. Charpentier's property, so that you heard from somebody, especially the applicant, how this issue should be treated. So we fully respect the notion of including it in that context. But the idea of the paper street being an issue, I think, goes away given the acknowledgement of the rights we note Mr. Charpentier has vis-a-vis private right of access over Woolen Drive. And furthermore, determinations as to the status of a paper street really aren't the province of the planning board. It's not the kind of thing that you would typically deal with. It's not the sort of judicial determination, if you will. It's not really your role. And a condition like number 4 would just leave uncertainty as to how the issue was resolved or not resolved, who would resolve it, who's equipped to resolve it, who are the parties to the resolution. None of that is stated or detailed. But again, I understand the staff's inclusion of it as a proposed condition, as again, to bring it before the board's attention so the issue's aired out. So it's important to us that condition number 4 not be a condition of approval for these reasons, and I think justifiably so, given that we're doing nothing more in this plan set than acknowledging what private rights of access Mr. Charpentier has, and also making clear to the board, which I think has been very clear for ages, that these paper streets no longer are burdened by public servitude, but there's no municipal interest in them any further. I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, and I tried to cover a fair amount of ground in as succinctly a manner as I could.
Mr. Varley?
I'm just wondering if you can speak to sort of, as the lot exists now, I mean, pre-development, I mean, doesn't this same both practical access and paper street private right issue exist as it stands right now? I mean, in other words, the proposed development doesn't alter the current state of affairs in that regard, right?
Correct. We did an extensive amount of title research on this property, as well as research at City Hall in terms of the status of these streets. When did we first find them laid out? Well, we found the 1965 plan, which ones were discontinued by formal action, which ones were passed away by expiration of 20 years. But whatever private rights of access exist as a result of the 1965 plan and the expiration of the public servitude, they exist. They don't go away. They definitely exist.
It exists today, right? I mean,
I'm sorry?
And they exist today.
Yes, they do. They absolutely exist today. And the one that has practical effect is the one that pertains to the access to Mr. Charpentier's lot. I'm sorry.
And then just as a, I guess, follow-up to that, I mean, it appears to me that private right of access would run across both the cited issue here and then the two lots, looks like lot 230 and lot 224. Is that correct?
Yes, because Woolen Drive ran through those two lots. Effectively, the boundary line between those lots is essentially the center line of the Woolen Drive paper street. Yeah. And that's why you see the dashed line going out to West Hollow Street on our plan set. Just as an aside, and so the record's complete, I think it was 2005, the city, the aldermen discontinued formally that portion of Woolen Drive that goes in between those two lots on West Hollow Street, and the city quit claim any right, title, and interest it had in Woolen Drive to the respective property owners. I don't know if they're the same people today as were back in 2005. Apologize for that. But my opinion is that irrespective of that, the private rights of access don't go away.
And just, and to your point, you know, regarding sort of the resolution of this, if there were to need to be one, I mean, just as a practical matter, to provide access over this private right of access would presumably need to involve all three of these property owners here.
Yeah.
Or all four, I guess, technically. I mean,
I think your resolution is, in the context of this application before you, is simply noting, as we have done in the plan, that we recognize the private rights of access exist. That is, we are not asking you to approve a plan that pretends that they're gone.
right.
So of record, we're putting nothing on the record that could be argued by Mr. Charpentier that you put a stamp, if you will, on a plan that did violence to his private rights of access. No, we wouldn't put you in that spot because we know that that's not the reality.
Right, yeah, I guess, my question was somewhat different, which is, I guess, further to your point about sort of what our rule is here with respect to this. In other words, that we could not effectively, through the mechanism of this plan, reach a resolution because there are other private property owners that would need to be part of any such resolution. You know, for example, if Mr. Charpentier asserted his right to private access through those three lots, it would require the cooperation of those other two private lot owners, correct?
Yes, I mean, if Mr. Charpentier wanted to build a driveway, if you will, from West Hollow Street through their two lots and on, and through the leg portion of this lot to his property, he would have to go through whatever approval processes were necessary, demonstrate the right to do that. Probably we would have to get a variance for the lot for a couple of reasons, I suspect. And engineer what would be necessary to do it and present it to you, or the zoning board, or both. That's outside of the scope of anything before you tonight. We're just not precluding that possibility by acknowledging the rights exist.
I just, real quick, though, have a couple of comments. The practicality of getting an actual driveway through lot 230 and 224 at this time, as those lots are currently constructed, and maybe this is a question for the civil engineer, I'm not sure. I mean, is it possible? You know, by approving this plan, are we essentially, in all real terms, creating a lot in the back that isn't accessible anymore?
Let me ask that piece, then maybe Tom would get up
Yeah.
on the, you're not creating any lot that is any different than what exists today, because lot 223 is not part of this application. So what you're approving is only what pertains to the lot 500 site plan development elements.
Right.
But you're approving a plan in which we indicate in this plan set that lot 223 has these private rights of access, so you're not approving something that ignores those rights of access. So that's the distinction. You're not approving a plan that changes the state of affairs vis-a-vis lot 223.
Right.
We acknowledge that state of affairs. The state of affairs is a compilation of all the history of the title and the plans for that lot.
Right.
In terms of the physical ability, if Tom could come up for a moment, I guess the engineers always tell me anything's possible. It's always a function of how much money you spend and what you need for slopes and drainage capability. If you have a sense of that detail, Tom.
Anything's possible, right? Tom Zajac, a civil engineer for Hayner Swanson. There is quite a bit of grade change there, no doubt, in that corner, so it would be rather challenging to get an access there. But as Attorney Westgate mentioned, there's essentially an easement there now for access, and we're respecting that with our project. You can see, you know, we're not clearing any trees, we're not touching any grades in that area of the site, so we are very much acknowledging and respecting that right of Lot 223 to make that connection if they choose.
Right.
But to answer your question, there would be some engineering challenges to deal with.
Right, yeah, as well as impacts probably to the, so, you know, can I summarize, I'll summarize what kind of I think that, you know, the construction of the two lots that are on West Hollis, you know, have sort of impacted the ability, or I'm gonna say the options that are available to Lot 223. And, you know, we can't ignore, even though, you know, obviously you have sort of rights to do what you're talking about, that there is an opportunity here to produce a plan that could provide access to Lot 223 in the future. You know, just looking at it in terms of just plain old land use, not lot lines or anything like that. So, you know, that's my concern here, is that for all practical purposes, we're gonna end up with a unusable lot in the middle of a bunch of lots, which doesn't help the city very much either.
I think the thing is, that exists today.
It exists today, but there are options today to deal with that, I think.
In theory.
But we're diminishing those options. So I won't kid you that I don't have a concern about it, so. Other questions, Mr. Weber?
Yes, for Attorney Westgate. Have you considered changing your, going to negotiation with, to change your lot line on that area and go straight to 230 with your lot line? And this would, have you guys considered negotiating with the owner of 223 and make that it bigger? Now he could use that lot to be more, and he could develop that, and then there'd be a real reason to develop that road through all those, and he could probably put 3 houses in there. I'm just, it's not something that you have to do, I'm just throwing that out there, that,
Well, Mr. Trammell had a number of conversations with Mr. Charpentier about the possibility of integrating Mr. Charpentier's lot into this overall development.
yeah.
It would have involved the purchase, Mr. Charpentier selling, Mr. Trammell buying that property to then design to do it. The two of them were not able to reach an agreement that was economically viable.
Okay.
It was reached out quite a while back. In fact, Mr. Trammell waited for that to work out to see whether it could work out or not before coming to this judgment that he had an under agreement lot 500, and this is a plan to design and put before you. There's, as you can see, there's a topographical difference between lot 500 and lot 223 in a couple different directions. So if you look at the topo on that site, you may have even more extreme topo going from lot 500 to lot 223 in certain areas than you would coming up the old Woolen Drive site. this condition exists as we speak today. I think the idea that the applicant has to explore other alternatives of development because of the nature of a neighbor's property, when having tried to communicate with that neighbor and work something out didn't succeed, effectively just becomes a roadblock, if you will, to anything happening on the property that the applicant has rights to, control over, and an ability to present before you. It would kind of turn the planning process on its head if abutters could effectively state that, well, unless you work something out with me, the planning board shouldn't consider what they put before it because it should be more comprehensive. This set of lots out here was laid out on a plan in 1965, which had a street system. Mr. Charpentier's company has taken title to that lot pursuant to its original established status as Lot 19 in 1965, and then as referenced in the later plan by Maynard and Paquette. I just have a hard time seeing how that circumstance can undo the apple cart of an applicant before you that has spent a fair amount of time and effort to design something that works on his site. And just one final thought, on the other end of Woolen Drive, as you head out to Gilson Road, plans came before this board years ago that permitted that development. They, as much as anything else, and frankly more so, preclude practical access to Mr. Charpentier's lot from Gilson Road in. This way, yes, there are two houses on West Hollis Street, and yes, there are topographical challenges, but there isn't a house that's sort of put in the middle of where Woolen Drive was.
Alderman Tenza?
Thank you. And just so I understand, if you could just clarify some things for me. Lot 223, would you agree with me that there was never any access to Woolworth Street, the paper street? The only access that they would have had out to West Hollis Street would have been?
Yes, correct, because there were lots between 223 and Woolworth Street on the old plan. That's right.
So the only access to West Hollis Street they would have had is the blue street up there, and I apologize, I guess Woolen Drive.
Yes.
That's the only access they would have ever had to West Hollis Street, correct?
Correct. They did. Woolen Drive went all the way through to Gilson Road on the other end. So in 65, there was unencumbered access, if you will, in both to West Hollis Street and to Gilson Road. Of course, none of it was ever built. Parts of the access off Gilson Road were built years later when a few houses were built off Gilson Road into that direction.
Can I ask, and do you have any sense of when the houses on lots 224 and 230 were developed?
How long ago?
Yes.
I'm not sure. Maybe one or two of those owners may be here tonight. I'm guessing the 80s. It's a guess.
Okay.
It might be later.
Do you know when the, I'll call it like the finger of land was added to the main part of your site?
Yeah, I'll try to answer it this way.
Yeah. Is that recent?
Now taking out a four-colored plan that we had to create to understand the title to this property.
Yeah.
In the mid-'80s, Mr. Charpentier and a partner owned most of, or much of what is depicted on Plan 16274. It included all of Lot 500, the paper streets we're talking about, other parts of the Woolen Drive lots, the Lot 223, and some other land. Yeah, I think it was 1994, he had mortgaged that property and was foreclosed. So he and his partner lost that property to foreclosure. So certainly in 86, the finger part was part of the overall piece.
Okay.
And certainly in 94, at the foreclosure, it was part of the overall piece. My recollection is from 94 forward, it has always stayed as part of the overall piece. But the Lot 19 piece effectively broke off, Lot 19/223, they're the same thing. That broke off into separate ownership up to the present chain of title to Mr. Charpentier's company. Way before the 80s, there was fragmented ownership of various lots on the old plan. Somebody would own 4, someone would own 6, that kind of thing. But then it all came together with Mr. Charpentier in 86.
Okay. Other questions on the board? Mr. Peterson?
Question for the applicant. So in between West Hollis Street or Wollen Drive and Lot 223, what type of topographical obstacles are there? Hills, valleys, that kind of thing?
Tom Zajac, civil engineer with Hayner Swanson. There's about a 25-foot grade change there between West Hollis Street climbing up to what would be the nearest corner of Lot 223. So as you move across the 2 road frontage lots, the small sliver of Lot 500, and that grade climbs up pretty fast. I think most of that is located towards the rear of those existing lots and on our lot. But you can see those, on our existing conditions plan, there's quite a bit of topography in there.
Thank you very much.
Are there questions from the applicant for the board right now, or for? Okay,
Oh, yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Peterson?
I believe this is a question for the engineer again. In the septic systems that are proposed, does each individual unit have its own septic, or is there a shared septic?
Each unit will have its own tank, but a lot of the units will share a septic, so I think 6 of the units each share with one other unit.
Okay. And the other question I have is, on the road, 28 feet wide, would that allow on-street parking?
Correct. Yes. Typically, the fire department, if you go down to 24 feet for a private street, they will require no on-site parking with plenty of no parking signs, so, which is why we went to 28 feet.
The 28 feet, remind me, how does that compare to a city street? Is that the same width?
Correct.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ballinger?
Question for the engineer. What is the speed limit on West Hollis Street at that particular point?
I believe it's 30,
I think in 45.
45?
I guess the follow-up to that question would be, do you meet applicable sight distance criteria out there? It's a 2-lane road, and I couldn't find a note on the plan or in the file about meeting that.
We did. So Steve Pernaw was the project's traffic engineer. He submitted a memo to the traffic department and as part of that, he looked at trip generation and the impact of this project traffic-wise, and also went out and measured sight distance and said we meet all AASHTO criteria for that roadway. And that was submitted to the traffic engineer.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of quick questions too. So can you clarify, would this be a homeowner association kind of concept, or?
Yes, it would be technically a condominium association, but yes, it could
Okay.
be a declaration of condominium bylaws, both that would set forth the whole governance and establishment of the community, including governance over common area, open space, conservation space, that sort of thing.
Right. And street maintenance, plowing, that'd be private?
Yes, all private.
How about, how is trash gonna be handled? What's the idea?
It's private curb pickup on each house, but I think, you guys folks correct me if I'm wrong, but in private condominium communities, I believe trash pickup is private.
So isn't it the city trucks are not going into there? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Other, Mr. Barley?
This is sort of a random question, but somebody raised this issue with me recently, and I understand that the post office is doing more of this clustered mailboxes now, so I was just wondering, will these houses have individual mailboxes, or will it be a cluster mailbox on this West Hollis Street?
The idea would be individual mailboxes, but typically the post office kind of makes the final call on that. I would say a lot of times on Loop Road subdivisions, the interior houses will have their mailboxes on the other side of the street to kind of minimize that. We haven't had those conversations with the post office, but.
But that would just be something you would determine finally with the post office before you would figure out?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Are there questions of the applicant at this time?
Thank you very much.
Thanks. At this time, I'd open to see if there's anybody in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan. Please come forward and just make sure you state your name and address for the record, and then go ahead and let us know what your questions or concerns might be.
Okay, my name is Joe Cavallo, 9 Tammy Circle. First off, the speed limit is 50 till about Overlook, then it goes down to 40, and then it's 35 just after the city landfill. Just to that point.
Thanks.
My real point, or question really, is this rights of access. Forgive my ignorance, but I'm a little confused. It seems to me that the attorney is like acknowledging this right to access without any authority to do so. It seems to me that, well, for one thing, this road, what is it, Woolen?
Woolen.
Woolen?
The
That
paper
does not go down to Gilson anymore because there's private homes there. It used to when I first bought my property. The second, I guess, question I have is, how can someone say that they have a right of access to this property across other people's privately owned property? Seems to me that sounds nice, but in all practicality, that is a landlocked piece of property. I mean, not landlocked, but it's locked by other privately owned property all around it. To put in this driveway or roadway, you would have to get the consent, not only the consent of the property owners that own that property, but you'd also have to purchase that property. So I'm a little confused how that can be a right of access when it's private property.
Okay, we can have the attorney address that as a, to your questions. But essentially, the paper street has been on the plans, for some time, even when those lots were constructed, per se. So,
That's all well and good, but that's still private property.
Right, but it's effectively an easement.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it'd be like, operate like any other easement. You can have an easement that exists over other private property.
So just, again, bear with me because I'm
Yep.
not versed in this, but right of access. So if the people weren't cooperative or, agreeable to that, there's no right that supersedes their property right, right? I mean, I don't understand exactly what the terminology means. If that's private property, how can there be a right of access? I mean, that's like empty words, because even if that paper road wasn't there, and Mr., I believe it's Charpentier, wanted to develop that property, it wouldn't make any difference. He would still have to purchase property from these other individuals, and he doesn't just have a right to, you can't make people like sell that property. I mean, it's still landlocked. That's kind of, it seems to me like that's an empty term. Right? You guys following what I'm saying?
I mean, I think, as the chairman said, Attorney Westgate can respond to this more specifically, but it's an issue of the title with respect to each of the properties. And, the title can pass rights of other people on your property. I mean, that is,
So you're saying that the people that own that property could allow them to do that?
well,
Which
again,
they could anyway, whether there was a paper road there or not.
yeah, but I think that's different than what Attorney Westgate, was describing, which is that Mr. Charpentier would have a continuing right, based on the land title.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you define continuing right to me? I'm not getting this. Because
I don't think it's for this board to define legal terms. If we need to weigh in on council, we can get that opinion. The attorney for the applicant is here. I'm not an attorney. I can't answer your questions. So I would leave it, perhaps Mr. Westgate, if he, during his response period, would take these point by point.
okay, because I would submit that that's an empty term. And you can't override someone's private property rights because there's existing access, unless, especially since the property owner didn't know it was there when they bought the property. And now all of a sudden, there's this right of access. That term doesn't seem like a legitimately doesn't have any authority. So that's my question, my concern.
Okay.
So that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a landlocked piece of property right there, or an inaccessible piece of property right there.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Yep.
Either gentlemen, my name's Earl Nipfer. I live at 1110 West Hollis, it's lot 132. And I just have a question for the developer. With that such a heavily wooded area, especially that finger section, I see where they have their site retainage and their silt fence down. Do they plan on clear cutting that whole upper portion area? Basically the finger area where all the heavy woods are. That's all I was just curious, how much of that land they were actually clearing up
Okay.
into there. That's
We'll-
it.
We'll ask them. Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? Thanks.
Good evening. Don Tebow, I live on 10 Caitlin Circle. That's just one of my concerns also is, are there stipulations when someone develops, can they clear cut right to the property line? Or is there supposed to be a buffer? Sounds like they're gonna try to leave a buffer. My question was, like, at the top of that design, they actually added some landscaping against that abutter. But none of the other borders have that. So I guess that's my question, concern. Can they clear cut right to the, or does it have to be a buffer
Okay.
of trees or whatever's there now?
All right, we'll ask that of them.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition and concern?
Peter Schaefer, 15 E Street. This project is within walking distance of the golf course. And I think it's also within walking distance of the Nashua River Rail Trail. So I would ask you to consider having a sidewalk on West Hollis. It's a pretty busy road. I know there aren't any other sidewalks nearby, but the shoulder is not in good condition at all. And I think the city is trying to encourage making the city walkable. And since you're near the Nashua River Rail Trail, I think you should consider that. And also, the people that are going to live there would also, I think, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern? Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? come on up, one at a time.
Good evening. My name is Siddharth Dubey. I'm owner of 1093 West Hollis Street.
Okay,
So Randy has spoken to.
make sure you're close to the mic, it doesn't pick up too far away, so. Yes,
My name is Siddharth Dubey. I'm owner of 1093 West Hollis Street.
yeah,
And Randy has spoken with me in detail about his plan, what he wants to build over there, and I don't have any objection. It would be good to have a few more neighbors.
okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in favor, come on forward. Make sure you state your name and address again.
It was right here.
My name's Pete Massini. I'm here with my wife, Dalila, in the audience. We reside at 1080 West Hollis Street. If you notice your aerial view there, it's the large property to the northeast of the proposed site. This site came before the board a while back, and the owners wanted to put a daycare center there, and the surrounding community was vehemently against it. This plan, however, is very agreeable to my wife and I, and we support it. Furthermore, we also support the notion that there not be any sidewalks. I have a considerable amount of vehicular traffic in front of my house, and on West Hollis Street, the sidewalks that exist are pretty much towards the center of the city to St. Joseph Church, if you're familiar with that. And those would be on the northwesterly side. This site here is on the easterly side, if you're heading north towards the center of the city. So if sidewalks could be deferred, I sure would appreciate that as a neighbor. I get along with all the neighbors that have developed around in my area. And, you know, we walk 200-300 feet on the shoulder. It's not a problem. So anyway, I'd like to further iterate, my wife and I support the notion, and we too would enjoy to have some neighbors as residences and not 200 cars coming in and picking up and dropping off their children. Okay, so we also support the playground for that one. Nothing against children, it's just, you understand, we'd rather it be a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the plan? We'll give you a chance to come back up if you have more.
I actually,
Okay.
I'm not speaking against it. I just want to clarify that.
Your name and address, though.
Joe Cavallo, 9 Tammy Circle. I just want to clarify, I'm not necessarily opposed to this plan. I don't have a problem with that plan. My problem was only with the access to the inaccessible lot.
Got it.
So,
Got it,
just
okay.
want to clarify that.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Okay, at this time, I'd ask the applicant to come up. There was a few questions raised. I'll just kind of remind you about a couple of questions. You know, we'd welcome, as a land attorney, maybe you can explain your understanding anyway of the rights of access and the continuing rights. And then maybe address the buffer question, what's required for this particular type of parcel. And the plans for any kind of change of the topography, landscape, whatever, down in that finger area of the site.
I'll address the paper street or access question, and Mr. Zajac will deal with the other two that you referenced, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks.
That's more appropriate, I guess. I think Mr. Varley, by using the word easement, shed perhaps some light on what I meant by the right of access terminology. So I appreciate that, getting that word out on the table, if you will. So it is, I understand someone would wonder, how does somebody have an easement or right of access over this property without asking my permission to do so? It kind of comes from two sources. our Supreme Court, in a number of cases, and frankly, many, many decades ago, first determined that when a subdivision plan is approved by a planning board or city commission or city engineer in the old days, when it shows streets on a plan, they're platted is the term, then immediately that approved plan creates rights in the city to build a street. That's what we call the public servitude. So the actual creation of this plan and the drawing of lines on it and approving it gives the city the right to build and accept these streets. But the courts also decided that even if a city didn't build these streets, the lot owners, the people who own the lots shown on that plan, have an easement to use that street system to the extent they need it for access to their property. It's implied, it's a sort of implied or inherent easement that is established by the very creation of the plan and the approval of it by the appropriate authority. So when someone buys property, a title search is done, and it may take a while to get back there, but a title search is done, and ultimately you'll see in that title search this plan that created these roads, these streets. When you buy property, you're deemed to have knowledge of what's recorded at the Registry of Deeds in your chain of title. Even if you don't have actual knowledge in your own mind of all these documents, plans, and deeds that are in your chain of title, the law effectively imposes upon you that knowledge. So when you buy a piece of property that's created from a subdivision plan, like many of these properties that we're talking about, both ours and adjacent today from that 1965 plan, when you buy a property off a plan, you're deemed to know what's on the plan. Well, one of the things that's on the plan is the street, or the paper street, which carries with it this right of access or implied easement for the lot owners to use it, whether or not it's built. So it's a totally different set of circumstances than buying a piece of property that was not on a plan, that didn't have a street running through it. That's a completely different dynamic. If I bought a piece of property that's just a box off West Hollis Street, never was part of a subdivision plan, has a historical description from the 1700s, I don't have any burden on me like that, because there was no plan approved that created streets through it. But when I buy a property that emanates from a plan with a street system, it's imposed upon me the burden of that street system. If you take a look at Plan 16267, the original plan I had in my packet, you'll see that the two lots that are on West Hollis Street, that are on each side of the blue on Woolen Drive, don't include the Woolen Drive components. Woolen Drive runs right between the two. The depiction of those lots today includes the Woolen Drive components, but the inclusion of the Woolen Drive components didn't go away the 1965 creation of Woolen Drive and the implied easement that carried with it. That just doesn't go away. The folks who own the two lots on West Hall Street own the bed, the fee, if the lawyers call it. They own the dirt that Woolen Drive is written upon as a paper street, but they own it subject to this implied easement. So that's how the law works. And I understand how a layperson and even someone involved in real estate it wouldn't dawn on them that that's the case. But that's the conclusions that our court reached decades ago as to the effect of these paper streets and the implied easements that carry with them. I hope I'm not, I know this is a little deep, but
It's okay.
frankly,
No,
I think
it's important.
I
to
think
kind of talk
it's
about it.
coming through, I think.
Mr. Peterson, you have a question on that?
Just as a point of clarification, with respect to this topic of discussion, Lot 223, the landlocked one, has rights of access to their land through those other lots that are in the way, such as 224 and 230, which are on West Hollis Street, and the new project that we're talking about, number 500. So those other landowners, they'd be required to allow the landlocked property to come through with vehicles, utilities, whatever, so they can get to their property. Is that correct?
Vehicles, utilities, I'm not so sure our courts have ever fully
They'd have to get
analyzed
other
that one.
permissions for that.
Yeah,
But they would have access to it.
But they would have
The other
access.
people would be required to allow them through.
To the extent the access can be made in the location of the paper street. They don't have to allow them rights over the land that's outside of the paper street, but only to the extent it's in the paper street.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for the attorney? Well, it's okay. No?
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Zach.
Okay.
Just one last thought on the paper street item, being not an attorney, is that we're not creating, this was an existing condition, we're not creating anything. In fact, as Attorney Westgate pointed out, you know, we are recognizing the facts out there with our plan and kind of clearing up what may be an unknown out there. So, and certainly our projects fully represents, that kind of jumps into the first question about the clear cut with the finger. You can see on the display plan in the middle, the change in green there. We're maybe the first 20, 30 feet, we're adjusting the topography just very slightly there, and then the rest of that finger is going to remain untouched in its current condition. And speaking to, I'm not aware of any formal buffers that are required by the regulations for single family to single family. You can see that on the aerial photo, which is maybe not the complete latest photo. I think it's from 2018, but it was kind of the clearest we can find. You can see where the former gravel operation kind of took out some trees in the central portion of the site. There's a row of trees protecting our site from the lots off of, I believe that's Caitlin, to the south. We're respecting those trees, and you can see on our plan we are respecting you know, a 5 to 10 foot buffer elsewhere. Mr. Turmel, as I mentioned, has really gone door to door and wants to be a good neighbor and has committed to folks that he'll be willing to, you know, plant some select materials throughout as once the project is finished in an appropriate location. And that's what we were kind of representing to Mr. Massini's property to the north there. There aren't really any vegetation there along that common property line. So even though he may not be required to by the ordinance, Mr. Turmel's being a good neighbor and trying to provide a little bit of buffer there. The one last point with the trails, as I understand it, when an applicant makes a contribution, it's divided up into the 4 quadrants of the city. So these resources would be spent as the city deems necessary, either along this West Hollis Street corridor or, you know, within public trail systems. So we think it's much better than building sidewalk along this very short stretch.
Alderman Tenza?
Can I just follow up on the packet that we got tonight, on one of the letters of support from the folks at 15 Colonial Ave? There's a note at the bottom that Crimson Properties agrees to plant evergreens and some flowering plants abutting a portion of the right rear property line. Is that a note from the homeowner? Okay, so
Yes.
they put that in there? and
They
just
wanted it
create
in
the
writing,
record?
yeah. And Mr. Turmel obviously is sharing that
Sure.
with you into the public record and is committing to that.
Okay, so I'm sure there's still time for homeowners to have that discussion with Crimson Properties.
Yes, to be honest, as I understand it, he's tried to speak with and has speaking with almost everybody who abuts his land there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
at this time, is there any other questions from the board for, specific to the applicant's rebuttal? So, all right, so the procedure of the meeting is I can allow, like, if there is still questions out there for the public, I would allow someone to get together, but sounds like we're set at this point. Okay, all right. So any further questions from the board while we're in the hearing for the applicant or for staff? Okay. All right, at this point then, I will go ahead and close the hearing and move into the public meeting. All right, so we have this seven home subdivision here, obviously on the single lot. We've had a bunch of discussions about the access of the central lot. Obviously, it's a complicated scenario with that existing paper street. There is obviously recognition of that street from the applicant, so they are noting that at some point there may be some sort of access required through their lot to the lot 223. So I think at least we've got an accurate plan this time around.
The other thing, Mr. Chairman, that I'll note is that in the letters of support that have been submitted by the applicant, the homeowners at 1100 West Hollis Street and 1096 West Hollis Street, which are the other two properties affected by this issue. They've submitted letters of support, and presumably, as the homeowners, they know about the potential issue going forward.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, that the two most affected by it, the paper street anyway, seem to have gone on the record here, so.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think, as the applicant stated, I mean, they're not changing the state of affairs here. That, their property is, they're acknowledging the right of access, acknowledging that the plan doesn't affect that right of access, and they're not even, in fact, developing that section of the lot over which the right of access passes, so. It's an unusual situation, but it's, a function of the existing lots, so.
So with regard to, the applicant did ask about stipulation number 4. What's the board's feeling with regard to that? I'm not sure I want to have that on there myself, so, but I'm interested in your thoughts, so.
I mean, I personally would be in favor of removing it, because, I agree with Attorney Westgate, that it's really, when it comes down to it, it's the right of access relates to the rights of these various different private property owners, and it seems to me that I don't even understand what the condition would be. I don't think that there's anything that we could enforce in terms of a resolution. I think it would be ultimately up to the property owners if the owner, lot 223, wanted to enforce that right of access, he could do that, but it seems to me it's beyond the purview of what we're reviewing in connection with this site plan.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bollinger? Yep.
I would rather personally see it stricken than for us to try to wordsmith it into something conveying intent, which we don't necessarily have full comprehension on. If potentially this is a private matter between 4 separate landowners, I don't know if there's a note we could come up with that would be sophisticated enough to entail all the specificity required in this particular instance, so.
Okay.
I'd agree.
Okay. And then we do have the sidewalk. We've talked about that. I mean, there is again, the sidewalks do kind of stop, I think, down sort of a little further after the, you know, towards the, where the dump is down there, right? But, you know, getting the contribution, I think could, you know, could help maybe start moving things further in the right direction there. So I'd be in favor of that.
Is 6 still the same?
6, I believe, is still the same, yes.
What was number 1? Wow.
It was 11,700. That's what the applicant corrected it to.
Thank you. I would, just as we're thinking about what the motion would look like, I would propose a minor modification to stipulation 8, just to indicate that it's prior to the issuance of building permit, the applicant shall provide condominium documents with respect to maintenance of all property in common ownership.
Okay. Any other discussion items, or anybody willing to make a motion?
Actually,
Staff, yep.
one correction on waiver number 1.
Yep.
Should, the very last line, payment to be made prior to chair signing the plan.
Right, yep,
So strike recording the plan.
yep.
Because being a site plan.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I would sign it, yep, okay. Mr. Ballinger?
Note 9, prior to the issuance of a building permit, all easements shall be submitted to the Planning Department and Corporation Council for review and approval and recorded. Are there any entanglements in this instance with easements because of the paper street? Does that deserve any special note or recordation?
Is that for stormwater docks?
I mean, I think this is a pretty standard condition.
Stormwater docks technically could fit in that category.
Say that again?
Stormwater docks could technically fit as an easement.
I think in most cases, this would be a fairly standard note, but because of some of the other issues that have been brought up, I just didn't know if
Yeah.
further observance of that prior plat layout needed to be noted there specifically.
I think it's shown pretty well in the plan, and
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
got the note, so that's probably adequate as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and I think this is really a distinct condition that's, I think, unrelated to the paper street issue.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Anybody willing to make a motion?
You want me to?
All right.
Go ahead.
Mr. Varley?
I will make a motion to approve new business number 5, site plan, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D, with a total of 10 stipulations. The first stipulation being a waiver request with respect to sidewalks, and that shall read, is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation, with the applicant having agreed to make a contribution in the amount of $11,700, and then the final sentence of that being corrected, so it indicates that payment is to be made prior to the chair signing the plan. Stipulations 2 and 3, to read as written in the staff report. Stipulation number 4 to be stricken. Stipulations 5, 6, 7, to read as written in the staff report. Stipulation number 8 to be modified to read that it's prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall provide condominium documents with respect to maintenance of all property in common ownership. And stipulations 9, 10, and 11 is written in the staff report, and stipulations 5 through 11 renumbered to reflect the removal of stipulation number 4.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve by Mr. Varley with the 10 stipulations as stated. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Alderman Tenza. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? None? That motion passes. Thanks. Okay.
Adam, did you, besides the stricken, F5 through 11, did you make any changes there?
To number 8,
Number 8?
which is just referring to condominium documents. So it's actually homeowners.
Okay, so I'm just gonna move forward here. New business site plan number 6, John J. Flatley Company. That item is postponed till December 5th meeting. Other business, case number 1, review of tentative agenda to determine the proposals of regional impact. I remind the board that we have a newer version of that came in your packet. So let me or if you haven't, maybe take a look at that and then make a motion as to whether or not there are any particular proposals of regional impact. Mr. Varley?
I make a motion, having reviewed the technical review meeting minutes, that there are no proposals of regional impact.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Varley. There are no proposals of regional impact. Folks? Yeah. That's all right, thanks. So do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
Second by Alderman Tenza. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes.
Adam, you did that vote, right?
Yes.
I was
Okay,
busy.
so, other business, case number 2, amendment to the FY 2020 capital improvement program, adding 4 new items. Roger, do you want to talk to that?
I could, if you don't mind. In your packet tonight, you've got the full description of the 4 projects that were requested by the administration and the divisions to amend the CIC plan. There were some surpluses at year end, as well as some changes in regards to a middle school project with the school department. And so the committee took up at a special meeting on September 23rd all 4 items. They rated these 4 items, and if you like, I can go through those quickly. The committee assigned A ratings to all 4 projects. In the minutes that was in your pack that was mailed to you, we gave the Division of Public Works Facility Building, which was, I think, a $10 million price tag for FY20, an A1 rating. The Janus Streeter Theater Fire Suppression System, that's adding it so the theater at 14 Court Street would be compliant with the current fire codes. And it is an occupancy, a lot of people attend it there, and this would bring it up to code. That was given an A3 rating. And next door, there was a plaza renovation to renovate the plaza that's on the library trustee site to improve a number of different issues with that site and make it work better. And that was given an A1 rating. The big project was the middle school project. Looking at, the school department looked at all 3 middle schools. Number 1, they wanted to do some additions to Pennachuck Middle School with some additions to help improve safety and add, I think, a couple classrooms so they could accommodate 800 children. They were going to look at some internal design issues and maybe minor site issues with fairgrounds. And then thirdly, they're looking at the big issue, which is whether to renovate Elm Street Junior High School or build a new middle school out in the southwest quadrant off of Buck Meadow Road. And that was the big project. They're still considering their options there. I guess there's some issues with Elm Street Junior High School, its age and its ability to meet certain school department requirements insofar as the state education requirements. And so they're in the process of making that decision. That they added, I think, approximately that project shown in in your description sheet here as $3 million. Overall, that is, over the next several years, would be over $100 million to do all three schools. And that's in your long-range plan, which is attached at the end of this project. And that project was given an A1 rating. The city wants to move forward with some, funding and bonding issues before year's end with these projects, and that's why the committee met in September. It's now to you to either make your own ratings or agree with the Capital Improvements Committee like you normally do at the end of every year. We're just amending the FY20 plan, and you can either make changes to that and forward those separately to the Board of Aldermen, or you can agree with the committee's ratings and just forward, that favorable recommendation on to the Board of Aldermen.
Question.
Sure.
Greeley Park Facility Rehab. That has their facility, they're gonna change some infrastructure and it needs attention. It's saying, there is a, part of that facility has historical value to it. Was that considered and anything?
Are you referring to the Elm Street Junior High School?
No, Greeley Park Facility Rehab on page 12.
The
That's not
Greeley
one of the
Park,
new-
Oh, I'm looking at the old one then.
Yeah, no,
This
we're
is the
just
one that
looking
was
at
in my pack.
We're just looking at the amendment.
Oh,
This is just 4 newly added projects.
yeah,
Okay.
they're all, the ones you're looking at have an asterisk next to them
yeah,
that are described.
okay.
We amended the plan, the long and the short-term A projects.
Okay,
So that is not included in that. That's the $10 million. That's basically to look at building a new facility, location probably at the landfill to house several of the functions of the Public Works Division. And without getting into any greater detail, that's basically what it is. I can read you that description if you like, Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I mean, it's just these 4 and that were
Yeah.
added on. We've already gone through the other
okay.
portion of it, so.
Well, that's the only thing I was thinking of because I'm on the HDC and I don't know if that had any, who would I talk to if I wanted to talk to somebody about that?
You mean the Park Department's facility at Greeley Park?
Yes.
Yeah, you could talk to Nick Caggiano. Obviously, if there's some historic significance of the park and rec buildings, maybe they can be used for some other purpose. I understand that they have some serious problems with the building itself.
Yeah.
As an office building, and
I'll
that's what
talk
they
to
use
Carter
it.
then about it.
Right.
See what he wants to do.
Right.
Yeah, and just for you folks who are sort of newer to the board and stuff, so that, I sit on this CIC committee, subcommittee too, so I'm part of the process of, going through these and have had a chance to look at these and sort of concur with the rest of the subcommittee's agreement or, recommendations as well. Any questions? Somebody want to make a motion? So the motions here would be for a, it's like it's like a favorable recommendation.
Technically,
essentially.
you should maybe say
Yeah.
you accept and forward the
Yeah.
recommendations with no changes
Right.
to the full Board of Aldermen, as recommended by the Capital Improvement with no changes.
Yeah. Anybody willing to make a motion? Alderman Tedder?
I'll make a motion that the planning board sends a favorable recommendation for the amendments to the FY 2020 capital improvement projects as recommended by the subcommittee. And we pass that favorable recommendation along to the full Board of Aldermen.
Okay. Any second on that?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Barley. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion passes. Okay. Any other discussion items, anyone? At this point? If not, I take a motion to adjourn from anybody.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn by Mr. Varley. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned at 9:35.